Hello and welcome to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. I always like to make sure that people know that our guests are also incredible people that are speaking to something that they've not only studied but also experiences you've been to. So.
Most of the discord comes from just a misunderstanding.
Don't give excuse to things that you are supposed to be doing.
The truth is really finally starting to come out.
Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. In a time of heightened division and our perceived differences seem magnified, our focus today is to find out whether or not there is a discord within the diaspora. Welcome to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. I'm your host, BC, and joining me on this conversation is Tabitha, Woodson, and Janessa. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, one of the things that I always want to start with is just kind of a little bit of a background on this conversation. We know that there's this miscommunication when it comes to whether or not, we're in touch with our backgrounds or whether or not, we understand each other enough as a people. So Janessa, I know that you are from Liberia. Your parents, both of your parents are Liberian, but you were born and raised here. And Woodson, you're from Haiti. And Tabitha, both of your parents are African Americans. Now, guys, talk to me a little bit about your perception on this particular focus, this topic.
Well, I think I was born and raised here. All I know is America, but I think most of the discord comes from just a misunderstanding, not really knowing about either culture. I think I found a lot of the conversation, especially amongst my Black American friends and I, tends to be they just don't know any better. Mm-hmm. And I think, if you ask any average person, they don't know much about Africa or anything that's going on. And I think a lot of Africans have the same kind of issues of the media and the images that they're presented about Black Americans. They come over and then, tend to have their own ideas about people that they've never really dealt with. So I think it's mostly a matter of just a misunderstanding and just a lack of knowledge in general.
Would you guys say that more now than ever, people are wanting to be more in touch, especially from an African American perspective, to really, you hear about all the DNA tests and people want to find out about their roots. I feel like there was a time where there was really a division when it came to just, no, I'm African American. But would you guys say now more than ever that people are really wanting to understand where they come from? And if so, why? Why now more than before?
Absolutely. So as a child growing up, I was born and raised in rural Virginia. And I think that I come from a perspective of most African Americans. We didn't have the benefit of having a parent who was African or directly born in Africa or even knew where they came from, nor did the majority of us end up in a historically Black college or university. So you're raised in an area where you go to school with a majority of white children. There's maybe a handful of other Black children per class. Your history is taught as African American history. We're even lucky to have one African American history course in high school. And you think about that, that's 20 children, 1 to 2 classes per year. So 40 children are going to get the benefit of just learning additional history on African American history. And that's it. So never do they run into a situation where they start to really learn about Africa, where they come from, what languages are spoken. And instead, it's replaced with things that you see on the news and on the media, even, just talk among the community. All you get is that, you're this displaced person, that you don't have a history, and that, it's your, this is it. This is what you make of it, is what you have here. Yeah. And I think that we're moving. Our generation, or the millennials, are definitely moving towards wanting to know more. I think even with the Black Panther movie that just recently came out, people are so excited about Wakanda. Well, Wakanda is an imaginary city. They don't understand that there are cities just like Wakanda all over Africa, because instead there's this idea that's been planted that you would be hunting lions or, living in a hut.
It's funny you say that, because that's kind of one of my experiences when I first came back. Even though I was born and raised here, those are the type of questions that people would ask me. And sometimes there was sarcasm, but sometimes I realized that people just don't know. So, when you talk about being of African American descent, and you speak to someone else that's of African descent, it seems that we lack the understanding of why each other are passionate. But at the end of the day, it seems as though if we use our voices to educate one another, we'll probably have more understanding, because at the end of the day, we are one race. Now, Woodson, were you born in Haiti?
I was.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your experience, being born in Haiti, and then your experience also living here, and the differences in the way you feel you relate to people, especially having grown up there.
Absolutely. So I was born in Haiti, and I moved here, just to get an education. But I guess I'm sitting in the middle for a reason, because being in Haiti, it gives you that feeling that you're the middleman. You have the same background when it comes to slavery and being colonized by the French or the British. But at the same time, you also understand that, you're very close to your culture, your roots. As a matter of fact, we even have musics and other forms of arts that's called racine. Racine is a word that means roots. So, with that in mind, you think about, we know where we're from. Our parents, our ancestors made sure that we knew that we came from countries like Guinea or Benin, etc. So I think that really helps with the conversation. And being here, you're basically becoming the same thing. The guy that can get along really well with the African brother, and same thing with the African American. So I totally understand that, there's keyword perceived differences.
Do you feel that do you personally feel that people look at you differently when you say, I can identify where I'm from, especially if you're speaking to someone who maybe can't say the same thing?
Yeah, I would say so, because, with either part of the conversation, I think that I've been afforded, the opportunity to be the guy to speak up because of my background. I can be with my African friends and they say something about the African Americans, and it's my opportunity to say, well, why do you say that?
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
So, and I also had the chance to go to a, black college, out to the University of the District of Columbia. There's a massive number of African students, but there's also a lot of African Americans. You can tell, that there's, I don't want to say tension, but it's a perception that we're so different that we gotta go on this side versus that side.
Yeah.
But but it's all perception, I think.
Now, Tabitha, you and I had a discussion about slavery and, the fact that a lot of times Africans may perceive that to be something that, African Americans should just let go. It's happened, like get over it and move on. But you and I had a discussion about why that should not be the perception. Share that story a little bit with some of our viewers.
Sure. So I think just starting with the fact that slavery was only outlawed in this country in 1865. There are so many other countries that are hundreds of years removed from slavery and have had that healing period, that opportunity to really begin to grow and to move forward. Even in Haiti, for example, the oppressors were removed from the country. We still live among them. And my grandmother, for example, was born in the 20s, and her mother and her grandmother were still very much so living in that same environment. It's very painful, and it's still very recent. So as growing up, you think, oh, well, we hear those same things. Slavery is something that happened so long ago. But as I started to really look at my family history and really start to dig back, I realized, oh my gosh, this is my great grandmother. This is my grandma's grandmother, was a slave. And there's a lot of history that we'll never know, but it's not that long ago. And even beyond 1865, we moved into Jim Crow era, and, all the way up until now, we're still trying to battle those problems that came along with it from slavery. So we are not far removed. We're actually right in the middle of our battle in this country at getting our independence.
Wow, that's great. And we're definitely going to continue this conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. Stay tuned. You're watching Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. Welcome back to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. We've been discussing whether or not there is a discord within the diaspora. And again, we have Tabitha Woodson and Janessa joining us. So Tabitha, when we went to commercial, you made a statement about the fact that it doesn't seem so far removed, but people would say, it's been, years now, and with the election of a black president, that at this stage, why are people still holding on to the fact that, you know, slavery existed? Why can't African Americans move on from that and move forward? It seems like a lot has been done, and wouldn't you say like the election of Obama is that change?
Unfortunately, the election of Trump set us back as well. For Obama, we ended up with Trump. So I would say, you know, to that, right now in the age of information, African Americans are just really starting to understand not only their current history, but past history as well. The truth is really finally starting to come out. And it's really created this sense of just this desire, this hunger for more and more information about who am I, where do I come from? Slavery was not that long ago. So our parents were not educated, or they were educated in a way that was unfortunately skewed, you know, to omit our information from it, or our information was skewed in order to just outright lie to us about, you know, what we've been through as a people. So the truth is finally coming out. And unfortunately, you know, we do get to a point where we have a black president, and then all of a sudden we have Donald Trump.
You know, what's funny is, and you know, thank you for sharing that, because I think for me that is the difference there, is like really understanding that perception, that perspective, should I say, and relating, even though it seems hard to relate because, you know, like Janessa, you could say, okay, your parents have told you about your roots and where you're from, but I think a lot of times people forget that this is a real thing that happened, and it's difficult to identify. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we can come together as a people, because at the end of the day, as we're all sitting here, you know, you're looked at as you're black. You know, no one necessarily separates it as African or African American, but amongst ourselves, it seems like there is that constant separation. Janessa, tell me a little bit about your views, you know, when it comes to the fact that you were born and raised here, and, you know, you're looked at in one way, but then when you're with, you know, your family, there's this change.
So I always joke that I was raised in America outside of the home, but at home I was raised in Liberia, as far as I know. My mom will tell stories about the neighborhoods she was from, like I was there with her. So I think it really just came down to, you know, having two selves. I had two consciousness. At home I was African, I spoke Patois, I ate the food, and then when I went to school, I code switched just as easily as the rest of my peers. And I think as I've gotten older, I've definitely noticed a difference. But of course, when I was younger, I was hit with all of those jokes as soon as I mentioned I was African, you know, the monkey jokes and your parents lived in a hut and all of those things. But also having to deal with, I express as a black American, so I have to deal with that double layer of good old fashioned American racism as well.
Now, you made a statement, you know, you were hit with that once people knew. Was that coming from a specific group of people?
It tended to come from, you know, most often black Americans who I now call friends. It was never really bothered me. It just came off as, you know, childhood teasing. I never had the perception that I was disliked because of who I was. It was just, you know, the dozens. So I think as I've gotten older, it's definitely gotten better. I don't get those questions anymore. And I think, as Tabitha pointed out, with the age of information, people are becoming more educated about where they come from, and they're realizing we're really all one. And so I think a lot of those divisions just come down to how people are perceived personality-wise. So you hear a lot of those things about, you know, Africans being arrogant or thinking they're better than black Americans, expect handouts. And those are just stereotypes that were handed to us, honestly, by the colonizer. We're told that, you know, as a people, we're not good enough. And instead of, you know, taking that and building power off of that, we're using it to fight each other. So I just think that's something to consider when we are discussing this discord, that a lot of the information that we are getting is not coming from each other. It's not an exchange of information. It's stuff that we've literally been told to believe, and then we're taking it out on each other.
But would you say that there are people who choose to not identify as an African that are African Americans?
Yeah, definitely. There are, and vice versa. There are Africans that refuse to identify
Yes,
as
and vice versa.
black. They will tell you, I'm not black, I'm from such and such country, or I'm African, or vice versa. You tell certain African Americans, and even me in my identity, I don't like being called African American. It makes me feel othered. I'm an American citizen, so either I'm black or you refer to me as American. So it really just depends on, you know, what people's perspectives are. But I have also seen that a lot of African Americans, as you would call them, do not like to be referred to as African American because it brings up slavery or the fact that their family has been here for generations. They don't know anything else. So to call them African doesn't make sense to them.
That's an interesting perspective. It's funny because I always say, wouldn't you say that if you were born in America and you're of African descent, that you are the true identity of an African American?
I mean, I agree with that, but I think in the sense when we have to be honest with ourselves. In America, when you see that hyphen, it's usually in the sense of othering. If you haven't noticed, this current administration changed the name of Black History Month to African American History Month, and it's a trend in them othering people who do not look like the ideal American. So I think you have to take that perspective as well. It's not necessarily shaming, it's just more, this is their country as well. Black Americans are just as native to this land as the white immigrants that came over here. So why are you othering them as if they're not?
So Woodson, what would you say it would take to really merge this conversation to where it's not like an other or, just, I think like you said, with the movies that are coming out, people tend to want to really embrace that identity. You have people like Oprah who did her, test and found, I think she was, well, I heard Ghana, but if you say Liberia, people are finding out and identifying with specific tribes and cultures in the continent of Africa, not the country as some people perceive, but what do you think it would take to really bridge that communication more amongst ourselves?
I think, it's a movement I guess you could call it, I know that on Twitter there's a Black Excellence movement that's going on right now, but I really think that it has to happen here. If it wasn't for the United States of America, I wouldn't have had African friends and African American friends. I would only know Haitians as Black people, and I would only have stories of where my ancestors are from. So I think that in the midst of everything that's going on, the division, the perceived division that we discussed earlier, this reunion is happening. It's happening slowly. If you ask someone, they might say slowly, but it's actually happening rapid, more rapid than we actually think about it. I think in arts and music, you see it a lot more.
Yeah.
Even if you look at, there are a lot of African music, a lot of
Being
African
played on
artists
mainstream.
that have songs with American artists, Black American artists.
Yeah.
Look at, we have a movie that just came out that basically showed us, the division between the two entities and how they came together at the end. I think that it's happening. It's a movement, and in the United States, it's a blessing because we're actually all here discussing it and having the conversation with all of the Africans and the African Americans, the Haitians, the Jamaicans, and everybody else.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing.
Wonderful,
We're
wonderful.
moving forward.
Yeah. So we'll take a quick break and we will be right back. You're watching Africa in Demand. Welcome back to Africa in Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. We've been discussing the discord within the diaspora. And before we went to commercial, Woodson, we were talking about the fact that there is a movement right now that's taking place. Now, you being from Haiti, talk to us a little bit about, your perception on even the way, your country is viewed, right? There's a lot of negative views as to where Haiti's been. And sometimes it seems like the country's being put on a back burner to the rest of the world and even the Western world. What are your thoughts and feelings about that?
Not to be too political, I think really the reason is because the history that comes from Haiti. Because a lot of people, with all these conversations, and I've had multiple conversations, especially after the comment that the president made about a month ago, is that there's so much history there. For instance, most of these people don't even know that Haiti is actually the first Black nation on earth. That we're actually, there is an ending to the movie when it comes to slavery. We actually stopped it and we got rid of our oppressors. So I think that because of that, it wasn't really, the right way to go, to portray that to the rest of the world, considering that most people with African descendants were slaves in different parts of the world. So I think that decades after 1804, we're still there, where they don't want people to see what's going on in Haiti. Now, just like every country, Haiti has their own political, social problems. But really, when you go there, when you get to interact with the people and you get to interact with the culture and understand how proud Haitians are, because there's something that you'll recognize when you meet a Haitian. He's gonna tell you we're the first black nation on earth. So, but there's so much to offer, from the music to the food to the culture, and the story can be different, and it's up to us, not just Haitians, but our fellow brothers that are from here and also from different countries in Africa, to change the conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do.
And I think that's the key word, is change the conversation. And I think change means educating one another, right? Like, not holding back information and sharing. I find that when we use the platform of, hey, if I meet you and you're not really as versed or educated in the things of Africa, to use my platform of explaining what, Liberia is like, because when people think of about Liberia right now, it's still tainted, right? Because people instantly think of what happened, right, with Ebola, and instantly they think that that's all it's about. But most people don't know that it has the largest rainforest in the world, actually. So I think it's about educating ourselves, but also learning from the history of what African Americans have been through in this country. What kind of things do you guys use or do now within your personal communities to shed light to those experiences, from your perspectives, of course?
I think for me, it's just mostly keeping the channels of communication open. Like, when I hear those comments made around me in either spaces, I just tend to, very quickly shut it down. I remember we were just having a conversation the other day, and somebody said something along the lines of, African Americans are expecting a handout. And I just stopped them. I was like, has it ever occurred to you, the country that you came from, when you were, building things and going to school and doing all these things, Black Americans were in this country building it up and not enjoying any of the fruits of their labor. So I think it's just kind of putting things in a perspective at all times, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the effects of slavery have never been rectified. Slavery is in this country's roots. It's how America came to be. All of these things around us, Black people built them.
So when you say that, you're saying, like, if you hear from like someone of African descent make a comment like, African Americans are waiting for handouts,
Right.
you stop that conversation.
Right there, just because I think, like I said previously, it's just a misunderstanding of history and just a lack of knowledge. And the same goes for, when I'm with my Black American friends and there are comments made, there are certain, stereotypical comments made about Africans, I'm very quick to just put an end to it, because
Like, what are some of the ones that you've heard? Or
I think recently I've heard a lot about, African men being a little aggressive, I guess, when they're pursuing women. And I just have to quickly remind them that all men are like that. Like, that's not something that, you should really put on one whole continent. You've not met all of the men in Africa, so why do you just make that assumption off of a couple of bad experiences? I think it's just a matter of putting an end to stereotyping people, because that gets done to us enough as Black people, so we shouldn't be doing it to
each other. Yeah. Tabitha, what's your take on that?
I would just like to add that I think we are at a time where we are, as a country, at least here in the United States, we are as divided as we probably have ever been. And this is probably new to us based on our age. This is new to us compared to our great grandparents, But I think more than ever, we need each other right now. We need to understand that while we might have originated in Liberia, whether we were dropped off in Haiti or we were brought over to the coast of Virginia, we're all the same people. We may now have assimilated a little bit differently, depending on where we are, but we're really all the same. And from the African American perspective, we can't grow if we don't get to meet people like Janessa that are going to tell us the other perspective, or if we don't start a conversation with a Haitian and understand that they're the same people, and the information that you can really learn from one another is really what's going to bring us together to be able to get us past the effects of slavery.
That's a very good point. And I think you guys have all really shed light from different perspectives, which I hope has been very beneficial to our viewers to see. But I first of all just want to say thank you guys, Tabitha, Woodson, Janessa, for joining us. This is a discussion that will continue to go on. Obviously, it's not going to end today, but we do really hope that we can all step up and make a difference by choosing to educate one another, because at the end of the day, we are one people, we are one race. Thank you for watching Africa on Demand, your gateway to everything Africa. We'll see you next time.